They dined on gold-trimmed plates, while their own bodies rotted beneath velvet, and every locked gate they built against the world became another door for fear to step through. Stay. By the last breath of this tale, you will know why the richest hearts in the Middle Ages trembled at their own reflection. They owned towers of stone and veins of silver. They slept beneath carved ceilings that caught candlelight like frozen rivers. Their tables sagged under roasted boar and sugared almonds. Their names echoed through chancels where stained glass turned dust into rubies. Chroniclers called them blessed. Yet step through the iron gate after sunset, and you taste rot before the scent reaches you. Picture the great hall of Lord Guillaume of the Quiet Valley. Tapestries ripple against damp limestone, weaving paradise while blue-black mildew blooms behind the threads. The silk masks a slow murder of air. Servants ladle resin on the torches. Smoke thickens, lungs burn. The Baron's youngest coughs scarlet into her lace. Physicians praise the cleansing of humors. She is barely 10 summers. By dawn she cannot stand. Nurses whisper novenas no one answers. Rich flesh spoils faster. Heavy velvets drink sweat and never dry. Brocade locks in damp like a coffin. Beneath the cloth skin ferments. Boils rise. Lice feast. Courtiers dab rose oil beneath their nostrils and pretend the perfume drifts from gardens rather than gangrene. Outside, frost glitters across the courtyard. Knights rehearse a tourney for a feast that will never begin. Hooves hammer flagstones. A rider folds beneath another stallion. Bones snapping like raw twigs. No one lifts him until the herald arrives, for only the herald decides whether a knight bleeds on stone or chapel floor. Protocol outweighs mercy. When consent comes, the man has drowned in his own lungs. Within the solar, the lady traces blurred scripture, though marsh fever steals her sight. A maid holds a taper. Moths dive into flame and hiss like dying prayers. Ash drifts onto the parchment. Letters seem to crawl, and the lady screams for her confessor. The cry ricochets down galleries lined with portraits, each painted smile cracked by winter. Beyond the curtain walls, peasants mend a fallen fence with willow. They laugh at a rude song. Their breath hangs white and vanishes. Lords fear that open air. Sunlight fades brocade. Thieves lurk in trees. A single arrow can erase a lineage. Safety demands darkness. So banquets burn in torch glow. Shadows creep across silver dishes. A cupbearer stumbles. Wine spills. Suspicion drips thicker than claret. The Lord Steward tests every goblet with a silver pin, already tarnished by yesterday's poison. Trust corrodes faster than iron. Corridors twist like entrails, so assassins lose the path. Yet the maze breeds whispers. Whispers birth interrogations. A steward vanishes. A laundress swings beside the kennels. The kennel master claims she consorted with fiends. No trial, no priest. Ravens pick the bones. Dogs howl each dawn, remembering. In the wardrobes, gowns lie dusted with ground, lead to dull the shine of lice. Powder drifts into mouths as bodices cinch. Lips numb. Gums bleed. Merchants call it beauty beyond mortal bloom. Merchants ride away with purses fat as goose livers. Ladies remain pale as moon-washed chalk. Everything is ritual, even fear. The Lord clasps a dagger before vespers, preferring blood on the flagstones to prayer unarmed. His confessor calls it devotion, forgetting the blade waits for him too. Plague carts rumble beyond the moat. Bell ringers beg alms, but will not cross the bridge. Disease must stay outside, not to save the Lord, but to hide what already festers within. Better the poor die at the drawbridge than reveal the smell behind the arras. Wealth once promised dominion over flesh, yet privilege gnaws its hosts. Silk becomes fetter, gold becomes bait. Inheritance becomes motive. Children taste for bitterness before sweetness. Mothers trade sleep for vigil. Fathers trade conscience for heirs. Moments become negotiations with doom conducted in whispers lest the rafters hear. Still, minstrels sing of radiant courts. Travelers gasp at windows taller than cedar groves, blind to the lime dust drifting from mortar, choking falcons in the mews. They hear bells and think holiness, unaware each bell shelters bats whose droppings eat bronze. Splendor and decay share a single heartbeat. Remember this when you picture a medieval banquet. Platters gleam because cooled fat hardens like wax. Laughter rings because lords sip wine thickened with honey to numb infected molars. Halls shimmer because 10 torches burn for every narrow window, and each torch exhales resin settling in lungs like damp grave soil. Forget the romance poets. Forget painted miniatures of silk-masked smiles. Hear instead the crunch of lice beneath ivory nails. Smell raw linen soaked in urine to bleach stains that will bloom again by night. Taste iron at the back of your tongue as the surgeon scrapes a boil with a bronze lancet last washed at Easter. Poverty bore misery, yet the poorest slept beneath stars and woke with sunrise on their faces. The richest paced stone floors polished by centuries of fear. Walls rose so high they stole the breath. Mirrors shone so bright they revealed only the ghosts of surrendered souls. Step deeper down the passage, where candles sputter and air thickens. At the end of this story, you will understand why the wealthiest hearts trembled before their own reflection. Guillaume de Beauve entered the world swaddled in brocade thick as winter bark, heralded by chapel bells that rang through fog over the quiet valley. Her cradle hung between hearth and arrow slit, warmed by peat smoke, yet chilled by currents that slipped through mortar cracks like unseen serpents. Midwives whispered she would be blessed, for her first cry sounded strong as a cornet. They spoke this to the baron, proud father, and he smiled beneath his trimmed beard. They did not mention the ash that drifted from the rafters and settled on the infant's eyes, a gray veil she would rub at dawn for the rest of her brief and brittle life. She grew surrounded by sound that never truly ceased. Water dripped into a copper pan under the western parapet night after night. Rats squeaked inside the corn chest. Hounds bayed at spirits, or thieves, or the moon itself. The girl's ears learned the castle's pulse as surely as her own heart's rhythm. When she reached the age of 7 summers, the chaplain taught her to recite the Pater Noster while pacing the south gallery. Each stone tile bore the faint shape of knees where ancestors knelt to beg absolution for sins they refused to name aloud. She pressed her palm to those ghostly prints, half expecting them warm. They were cold, always cold. Lessons arrived from traveling tutors who smelled of damp parchment. They praised her neat script, her polite silence, her dutiful curtsy. Yet in every compliment, she heard a subtle warning. Noble daughters must reflect the grace of God, they said, and God loved obedience. Obedience meant closed eyes, closed lips, closed doors. A girl who asked why grew horns in secret. A girl who lingered in the orchard after dusk risked unseen hands pulling her toward the hedge. So she remained within walls that sweat salt through autumn storms. Walls thick enough to muffle thunder, yet porous enough to spread the odor of stables into her chamber. Her world was color and mold existing side by side. Velvet cushions blazed crimson, but beneath the seams, lice nested. A gilt mirror flashed amber, but its frame wept green where copper met damp. Bread arrived warm from the ovens each noon, yet a dusting of white soon appeared, and within a day the loaf smelled of cellars. Guillaumina learned to tear crust and eat quickly before the fuzz took hold. When she complained of the taste, the steward prayed over the loaf and called the fungus a humble reminder that the purest wheat belonged to the Lord alone. She swallowed the blessing along with the mold. The winter she turned 12, a leather surcoat was cut for her, stitched with lapis ribbon and lined in squirrel fur. The tanner had not cured the hide long enough. A pungent slick coated the inside. She wore the gift day and night, for noble blood must endure small discomforts to harden the spirit. After a fortnight, the leather fused to her shoulders. Removing it tore skin. Pus bled through bandages, and the apothecary applied a paste of ground sage, candle soot, and wine so bitter it numbed the flesh. She bore the pain without sound, fearing any whimper might reach the gallery where her father entertained foreign merchants. Her mother praised the girl's composure, yet the praise felt heavy, like shackles carved from honeyed words. In the women's hall, she slept on a feather bed stuffed with down gathered 2 harvests earlier. Lice bred there as in a palace of warmth and secrecy. Each dawn, she and the maids shook the mattress over the sill, watching a snowy spill of parasites flutter onto the courtyard flagstones, a silent blizzard of living dust. They scorched the sheets above embers, scented with rosemary, to mask the stench of singed keratin. Still, each night the creatures returned, pilgrims seeking her body's warmth. Guillaumina scratched discreetly, nails cutting crescent moons behind her ears, red half-moons that crusted over by vespers. Freedom appeared as stories retold by wandering players in the great hall. They spoke of oceans wider than any valley, cities where silk banners flapped above bazaars, deserts glowing like copper shields beneath a never-ending sun. The air itself seemed cleaner in those tales. She listened, eyes bright, until her governess laid a hand upon her shoulder, reminding her that the world outside these walls teemed with plague and heresy. She must cherish the safety bought by her father's coin and sword. To doubt that safety was sin. One day, she would marry a knight sworn to protect the valley, and she would teach her daughters the same gratitude. At night, she knelt before her canopy bed and whispered apologies for thoughts she dared not voice in daylight. She feared God counted those thoughts against her, etching them on an invisible ledger. The confessor's visits left her trembling. He asked if she entertained wicked dreams. She confessed to seeing herself alone in a meadow with no walls on any horizon. He frowned deeply, for solitude bred temptation. He instructed greater fasting. When hunger blurred her vision, she welcomed it as penance. The year plague reached the outer villages, the castle gates shut like jaws. No minstrel, no merchant, no pilgrim crossed the bridge. Guillaumina watched carters pile straw against the portcullis gaps to keep windborne contagion at bay. Fear-thickened corridors already cramped by dread. A cousin arrived seeking refuge, his cheeks flushed an unholy crimson. He died by moonrise. They sealed his chamber with pitch. The pitch stank for weeks, oozing tar-black tears that hardened in glossy streaks. That wing was abandoned, windows boarded, doors chained. Guillaumina imagined the cousin's spirit pacing in darkness, repeating prayers swallowed by pitch fumes. Isolation became armor, and prison in equal measure. When her courses began, 2 matrons wrapped her in white linen and proclaimed her precious vessel of dynastic promise. They restricted her steps to the inner court, lest evil eyes steal fertility with a glance. She spent afternoons sketching through frost-clouded panes, drawing the distant forest she had never touched. Her charcoal trees leaned like supplicants against a sky-smeared charcoal. She drew herself at the edge, reaching outward, hair unplaited, face lifted toward light she had glimpsed only in sermons. One dawn she found blood on her sheets that was not the usual crimson, but a darker syrup edged with yellow. A damp cough rattled her chest. The physician arrived wearing ermine cuffs, a sign of status, though the fur crawled with unseen mites. He pressed fingers to her neck, declared an imbalance of collar, and ordered bloodletting. They tied her arm with a silk ribbon faded to the color of old bruises. As veins opened, she watched blood fall into a ceramic bowl already cracked. Heat spun behind her eyes. Voices drifted away, like gulls beyond the mist. When she woke, twilight shivered through shutters. A candle guttered beside holy relics, its smoke sketching serpents along the ceiling. She tried to rise, but linen stuck to her back, where sores had ruptured. In that moment, she understood her body was no longer hers. It belonged to lineage, to bargaining, to sanctity measured by hymens and dowries. She clenched fists unseen beneath coverings and felt only bone against cloth, worn thin as regret. Rumors reached her through maids who whispered while scrubbing chamber pots. In the lowland villages, people gathered under open sky to dance around bonfires, pleading with whatever saint might spare them plague. They sang until dawn, and some claimed laughter alone cured their terror. Guillaume pictured their faces lit by flame, sweat shining like dew, hearts beating with a rhythm older than scripture. She envied them. The thought felt blasphemous, yet envy burned warmer than the brazier at her bedside. Week by week, her father's counselors argued dowry negotiations beyond her door. Coin weighed against alliances. Fief weighed against her virgin breath. She pressed ear to wood panels and heard each clause like a nail hammered into an unseen coffin. They spoke of her as pasture, orchard, stronghold, vessel. Never name, never longing. The door smelled of resin and mouse droppings. She tasted both in her throat. Spring thaw crept through arrow slits, and the castle wept moisture along every seam. Wood bloomed with spores pale as moonrise. Her sheets grew spotted despite constant laundering. Bread molded within hours. Flies hatched behind tapestry seams and buzzed inside the bed canopy at night, a choir tuned to madness. She lay rigid, counting breaths, picturing spores burrowing her lungs, weaving lace of decay through tender tissue. She wondered if God forged mildew as a net to catch the souls of the comfortable. One afternoon, a swallow dove through an open shutter. Its wings beat desperation, seeking sky among rafters. Servants shrieked that ill omen had arrived. The bird collided with a pillar, tumbled onto Guillaume's lap, heart thudding as fast as her own. A single louse crawled across its feathers, refugee from some distant barn loft. She cupped the bird, felt skeletal heat, and ignoring cries of witchcraft, carried it to the balcony. She released it into a shaft of late sun. For an instant, wings shimmered bronze, then vanished beyond crenellations toward the forest she still had never touched. The women gasped. They crossed themselves. They scoured her hands with vinegar strong enough to sear skin. That night she dreamed of wind racing over grass taller than her shoulders, wind full of pollen and laughter, wind that smelled of nothing rotted. She awoke weeping, though tears felt forbidden. She wiped them before they stained the pillow and whispered confession to the darkness, promising she would think of corridors instead of clouds. When midsummer arrived without feast, for plague still stalked the roads, the garrison posted torches along battlements. Flames crackled like distant drums. Heat pressed through slits, turning her chamber into a kiln. Sweat pooled beneath her corset. Leather straps chafed wounds still red beneath salve. She inhaled torch smoke until the world blurred, and, for one merciful blink, Castle Quiet Valley melted. In its place arose a meadow filled with bells of foxglove, sky loud with swallows. Then smoke cleared. Stone returned, the corridor endless. Her own breath rasped like parchment torn. Before harvest, her father summoned her to the chapel, lit by honeycomb glass. He spoke of duty, lineage, salvation. A suitor of noble blood would arrive after Michaelmas. Marriage would anchor alliances that might keep the plague at bay, as if rings and prayers could outshout disease. She nodded, voice buried somewhere behind her ribs. He believed her silence meant consent. He blessed her forehead with wine. She smelled copper beneath the sweetness. That evening, alone in her chamber, she searched the mirror framed in tarnished silver. Candlelight carved hollows beneath her cheekbones. Scars where leather had fused traced pale vines down her shoulders. Lice bites dotted her neck like a star chart of sorrow. She touched the glass. It felt cold. She wondered whether reflections mourned the faces they imprisoned. Guillaume de Beauvais, daughter of privilege, darling of heralds, slept little after that. Each dawn, she paced between bed and shutter, counting heartbeat after heartbeat, waiting for color to leak into sky. The sun rose, yet corridors remained shade-struck. Rot lived inside the stones, inside the bread, inside her blood. Wealth had traded open fields for padded walls, and walls closed tighter with every golden clasp. She never stepped beyond them again. Her name survives in a dowry ledger, ink faded to brown dust, squeezed between lists of tapestries and pig iron ingots. Chroniclers note she passed away before the wedding contract bore seal, cause unspecified. They do not mention the leather that fused to skin, or the swallow that tasted a moment of freedom she never knew, or the way her prayers thinned into whispers, too soft for saints grown deaf on incense. Remember her when you picture brocade and banners. Hear the rustle of lice in feathers. Taste mold hiding beneath honey. Feel leather tightening like regret. Wealth in that age meant walls tall enough to keep out fresh air and thick enough to echo your own heartbeat back as hollow thunder. Wealth promised safety. It delivered slow suffocation dressed in silk. Guillaume lived and died within that promise, a child of gilded captivity. Her story lingers like mildew on stone, unseen yet breathing, reminding every curious soul that privilege without freedom is a candle burning inside a closed fist. A bell tolls in a distant keep. It shudders the marrow of memory and summons a litany of fates stitched together by the same poison thread. Money enough to buy a kingdom, yet never enough to purchase a single safe breath. Listen. Each tale drags a darker shadow than the last, until the corridor of privilege lies thick with echoes of boots that never reach the door. First comes Lord Alaric of the Ashen Border, carried on a bier through torchlit streets while heralds chanted psalms for his immortal soul. A surgeon had pressed a cool palm to the Lord's wrist, found no pulse, and pronounced the plague victorious. In hurried reverence, they sealed him in oak, hammered nails while his mother fainted, and lowered the box into a grave white with lily petals. But beneath the damp lid, Alaric's lungs still held a whisper of night air. Earth struck the coffin like drums. In panicked dark, he clawed at nothing, shoes scraping cedar until his nails tore free. By dawn, the sexton heard muffled thuds and feared devils. He fled to fetch the priest, who demanded light. They pried the lid and found Alaric twisted, mouth packed with splinters, eyes blurred with blood. Wealth did not protect, it killed. Word of that horror had barely softened when Lady Isabel, wife to Count Raymond of the Southern Reach, prepared for midsummer mass in the grandest chapel west of the river. The sun climbed cruelly, yet custom decreed she wear layered brocade dyed indigo, with an ermine mantle heavy as a tombstone. Etiquette forbade disrobing in sight of servants, and servants filled every alcove to hold her train. Incense rolled through nave and transept, thick as tar, swallowing breath. Midway through the creed, Isabel swayed. Her ladies whispered, but dared not touch nobility unbidden. The count signaled no pause, fearing scandal more than sickness. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel of gold and flame. She collapsed beside the altar, cheeks crimson beyond natural bloom. Physicians later called it heat within weak humors. They opened her veins, found the blood already clotted. The mantle remained draped over the corpse, as removal was deemed unseemly. Wealth did not protect, it burned. Northward, in a fortress, where every corridor tangled like ivy, Baron Gerald kept a private privy carved into the curtain wall, far from gossiping ears. One night, feasting turned to tension when rumor reached the hall of an assassin loose within the castle. Guards locked sections of the keep, steel gates crashing down like thunder. Geralt, stricken by the spiced goose and rich wine, begged passage to his solitude. Protocol chained his path. Each sentry awaited written orders bearing seals that slept in chambers now barred. The Baron's face sweated pale wax, yet no hinge opened. Pride forbade him to soil the public garderobe shared by squires. He staggered through arrow-lit gloom, clutching his belly until pain seized the heart itself. When they finally fetched the steward with keys, Geralt lay against cold stone, eyes wide in a question he was too noble to voice. Wealth did not protect, it denied. Across the sea lanes, in a harbor choked with masts, lived Magnus the Dove, a merchant prince whose coffers rang louder than cathedral bells. Each spring he affirmed allegiance to the crown by bringing tributes to the royal counting hall. This season he arrived late, caravans stacked high with silk, spices, mirrors, and casks of coin. Courtiers pressed forward, hands eager to tally. The hall could not bear the bounty. Chests blocked aisles, crates formed walls, fumes of clove and cinnamon turned breath to fire. A scribe cried out as a stack teetered. Magnus stepped aside in courtesy, but the crates lurched, the mirrors shattered, shards and cedar avalanched upon him. Servants froze, fearing blame. By the time boards were cleared, Magnus lay smothered beneath riches he alone could claim. Wealth did not protect. It crushed. 4 stories, each heavier than the last, yet they share one cadence beating like a funeral drum. Wealth did not protect. It killed. The vault of privilege sealed their fates with the same relentless mortar that built their grand halls. And as their coffins settled, fathers still counted dowries, mothers still stitched heirlooms, believing they could bargain with the inevitable if only the purse were deep enough. This was only the beginning. Comfort was a prescription, and every prescription was a blade. In the chambers of the rich, medicine arrived wrapped in velvet pouches, bearing seals of learned guilds and the musk of apothecary shelves. But whatever soothed for a moment soon exacted a price measured in pain, madness, or quiet extinction. Here, In the hush between bed curtains and chapel shadows, wealth turned the body into a battlefield where cure and curse could not be told apart. They began with blood. Physicians taught that excess humors brewed fevers, melancholy, fits of frenzy. The remedy was release. So, at dawn, servants laid embroidered towels beneath a lord's elbow and tightened a silk ligature until veins bulged like blue cords. A silver lancet, honed on whetstone and rarely washed, slid beneath skin. Thick ribbons of crimson drummed into a basin patterned with lilies. The patient was urged to gaze upon saints painted on the rafters, to thank Providence for mercy as color drained from his cheeks. When dizziness struck, they called it proof the poison fled. Should collapse follow, the surgeon whispered that noble constitutions require deeper purging and reach for leeches plucked from marsh barrels. The leeches writhed in glazed crocks, oozing mucus the shade of old pewter. Pages pressed them onto the Lord's temples, groin, or, if fever gripped the brain, inside the nostrils. Their mouths latched, mouths ringed with teeth finer than spider silk, mouths that sucked until they bloated like figs. When they released, they vomited dark clots onto the bedding. The stains never washed out. Chambermaids folded those linens away, promising to boil them in vinegar. Instead, they buried the fabric under rushes behind the stables, lest the Lord see what virtue looked like once it left his veins. If bleeding failed, fire followed. Suppositorial candles dipped in mutton fat and capped with beeswax were thrust into the rectum, their wicks trimmed by midwives who mumbled Latin half-remembered from friars. The flame rarely stayed lit, yet heat scorched tender tissue, provoking sweats lauded as cleansing storms. Patients clenched in shame while attendants counted prayers. Some fainted, others thrashed until restraints tore brocade sleeves. When infection blossomed, surgeons packed the wound with a gray-brown powder called mumia, ground from Egyptian mummies, traded by Venetians who swore the resin of ancient flesh carried life back into dying marrow. The nobility shuddered at the taste, but swallowed anyway, drinking the dead to outwit death. Nor did the search for remedy end when fever cooled. Daily toilette for aristocrats was an exercise in slow self-poisoning. Parasites thrived under layers of velvet and fur. Thus, every morning, a lacquered comb with teeth of whalebone scraped across the scalp. The process harvested waves of lice that popped beneath thumbnails, releasing a sour scent that clung to fingertips even after rosewater rinses. To mask lingering odor, valets massaged stale horse urine into hair and beards, an alchemical trick praised for brightening color and driving away nits. The ammonia stung eyes and blistered skin. No one complained. Where poverty reeked of dung, privilege reeked of disinfecting gold, women's faces fared worse. Fashion demanded a pallor unkissed by sun, a fragile bloom like milk just before turning. Powders of ground oyster shell and chalk served the peasantry, but high-born complexions required luster. Alchemists obliged with Venetian ceruse, a paste of vinegar and refined white lead. Ladies dabbed it over cheeks, throats, and sometimes breasts, glimpsed through slashed gowns. The veneer cracked by supper, so servants layered fresh coats until fissures sealed. Night after night, the leads seeped inward, loosening teeth, sapping memory, turning laughter into slurred riddles. In portraits, their beauty endures. In crypts, their skulls tell a different story. Bone, honeycombed by metal that glittered in candlelight. Archaeologists have sifted these truths from silence. In the ruins of Chateau Rochebrune, They found a bridal gown preserved behind a collapsed hearth, velvet bodice stiff with verdigris, where copper threads met damp, lace cuffs flecked with mercury dust. Strands of hair still clung to the collar, each filament lined with nits bloated into chalky beads. Nearby lay a child's shoe no larger than a sparrow, its leather warped but intact. Chemical assays of the soil revealed arsenic and lead in concentrations modern landfills rarely match. Wealth seeped into earth the way despair seeped into veins, leaving behind a ghost map of toxins. Far grimmer were the wells. Beneath Dunmar Castle, a shaft once praised for crystal water yielded, during a recent dig, the skeletons of 3 infants bundled in linen. The cloth bore silk embroidery, sigils of the house. Analysis of thread dye exposed high levels of orpiment, an arsenic compound used to achieve a sunrise yellow reserved for babies of rank. No parish record names these children. No chronicle mourns them. Perhaps they died of plague and were hidden to avoid panic, or perhaps they were never meant to breathe at all, shadows excised before scandal could form. Either way, comfort for the living demanded their silence, and the well-mouth swallowed both wails and evidence. Paranoia fermented in such halls. Cups of wine clouded by a stray herb sent stewards into rages. Cooks tasted every dish, but received no trust. Silver pins dipped in sauces tarnished, not because of poison, but because yolks and vinegar corrode the metal. The discoloration fed rumor. A duke slept each night with 2 mastiffs at the footboard and a dwarfish guardsman beneath the bed. A marchioness insisted her maid kneel beside the tub and sip the bathwater before she entered. Those who served high tables learned to expect accusation at any hour. Whole lineages of cooks vanished into oubliettes, guilty of nothing except preparing a meal on the day a noble's bowels turned. Salvation, they were told, awaited through confession. Yet confession itself became torment, a ritual flaying of conscience made crueler by hierarchy. The confessor sat behind a grill, unseen, his voice the dry rustle of parchment. He asked whether impure thoughts visited during unguarded moments, whether greed colored charity, whether pride tempted the tongue to mock the poor. Each sin demanded penance, more fasting, more flagellation, more alms paid to shrines that guarded holy relics. The weight of gold given proved the depth of remorse. And so, the wealthy emptied coffers to saints, even as they feared those saints watched and judged their every tremor. Guilt clung tighter than any louse. Rhythm sank into nightmare logic. Bleed to survive, blister to adorn, confess to be forgiven, purchase forgiveness with coin that might fund the very surgeon who cuts again tomorrow. The cycle tightened like a garrote, and the castle, imagined fortress of luxury, became a crucible where privilege melted into terror. Everything meant to comfort simultaneously destroyed. Velvet trapped sweat, pearls abraded skin, feasts corroded intestines, walls blocked contagion, yet preserved miasma. Devotion promised grace, but delivered dread. A paradox, yes, yet the logic was flawless. Wealth gathered tools to fight mortality. Mortality simply sharpened those tools into other shapes. And so corridors echo with 2 truths spoken in the hush before dawn. The first, wealth did not protect. The second, it destroyed with exquisite patience. The stories you have heard thus far are mortar stones in a larger ruin whose foundations you have only begun to see. This comfort, that is no comfort at all, is still breeding consequence in the dark. A plow groans at sunrise, cutting wet earth in a field beyond the manor wall. The blade shines, not with silver, but with dew that tastes of clay. and nettle. Bare feet follow, pressing furrows warm from sleep. The man behind the plow gulps wind that smells of dung and wild thyme. His ribs jut like branches in winter, yet his lungs stretch wide and easy. He curses a stone, laughs when a lark startles upward, lifts his cap to wipe sweat that will dry before dusk. This is poverty, raw as raw can be. But the sky hangs open above him, and no corridor steals his breath. Across the valley, curtains remain drawn. A lady rises beneath a canopy, heavy with dust. Lace cuffs scratch wrists, parceled for alliance. She crosses a floor so polished it mirrors the bars of her window. Servants lace her stays until breathing is a measured negotiation with pain. She watches light crawl along walls too thick for any birdsong to enter. This is wealth, bright as bright can be, yet the air weighs twice what air should weigh. 2 lives, one dipped in dirt, the other in myrrh. Which is better? The answer fractures the moment it forms. A peasant owns nothing but the sinew in his arms. He spends dawn to dusk, reaching, lifting, bending, binding. Muscle speaks a language simpler than doctrine. Move or stiffen. Hunger nips each evening, but seldom becomes poison. Bread is coarse, yet mold seldom digs too deep, because loaves vanish before spores take hold. Sleep arrives by moonrise on straw that scratches but breathes. The roof leaks but only a little. When storm clouds roll, he huddles under oak and feels wind hammer his skin like drum beats to remind him he is still alive. No tutor scolds him for dancing in the rain. His name appears in no ledger. He might be hanged for poaching a hare, yet he eats it anyway, tasting rebellion pulse-hot on his tongue. The noble owns everything except the sinew. His day divides into rituals older than his memory. Rise at prime, kiss the relic, don the doublet stitched with gold thread that frays if bent. Sit for stewed figs that coat molars in syrup thick enough to rot bone. Confer with lawyers about boundaries never walked. Listen to the physician weigh last night's cough in terms of unbalanced humors. Attend prayers, inspect armory, sign letters sealed with wax carved from ancestors' shields. Dine once more. Drink wine that clouds the pulse. Retire behind panels where footfalls echo like soft verdicts. In every hour, his posture must confirm divine order. His silence must guard family honor. His shadow must not fall where superstition forbids. Freedom shrinks to the span of a crossed palm. Scholars argue numbers. They count ounces of bread, yards of wool, years of life. They say the noble dined on spices worth a man's yearly wage, slept on down plucked from geese-fed grain soaked in ale, read words locked behind Latin declensions. They say the peasant's back bowed early, his teeth fell out, his children risk fever and famine. The ledger suggests wealth equates to comfort, ignorance to suffering. Yet bend closer, smell the mildew under damask. Hear the cough that starts in winter and never quite leaves. Touch the corners of the eye where lead powder gathers, turning skin to parchment. Knowledge, prized above coin, becomes its own sorrow. The noble reads bestiaries that claim the basilisk kills with one glance. He believes it because belief is safer than doubt. He pores over chronicles of princes murdered by kin. Each tale is a mirror held to his throat. The more he knows, the more he trembles at corridors without torchlight. Learning how emperors fall teaches how easily he might follow. Ignorance, meanwhile, guards the plowman like rough leather. He fears plague and tithe, thunder and the reeve's stick, but his nightmares seldom slip beyond what his hands can touch. He does not lie awake, parsing the symbolism of comets. He does not taste poison in every sip of ale. He trusts wood smoke to chase insects not alchemical vapors that promise purity and deliver lesions. His life may end by famine, yet until that day, he shouts at the sky, with lungs uncluttered by incense. Some claim the ruling class were victims of their own machinery. They sat upon gears they dared not halt, bound to etiquette forged by distant crusades and papal bulls. Break one rule, and the clockwork might grind bodies instead of minutes. A duchess who dared ride, exposed forearms, risked whispers of wantonness. A count who ate with peasants, invited rumors he coveted revolt. Each lived inside a suit of invisible iron, joints rusting with every breath. Others insist wealth is simply a larger cell, its bars gilded to disguise their bite. The lady who trembles before her glass still outranks the midwife who kneels to change her bandage. Power flows downward, even when fear floods upward. A lord may choke on mercury, but a servant will hang if the dose proves fatal. The system protects itself by feeding upon the very lives it promises to elevate. And what of knowledge? The monastery scribe dips quill and knows the world beyond these mountains, teems with armies, famines, fleets of pirates. Word of massacre travels faster than any relief. Literacy sharpens dread. The more lines he copies, the more certain he becomes that sin walks in every soul. The plowman carves notches on a barn beam to mark moons. His world ends at the tree line, but his heart seldom races at shadows because he names them simply night. So we ask, without asking, who truly lived? The one who dined on silver and slept on thorns of ritual, or the one who swallowed smoke but sang? Posters of chivalry depict jousts, banquets, chapels trimmed with gold. They omit the chamber pots carried through galleries, the rats drunk on spilled ale, the children traded like paschal lambs across borders of marriage. They omit the simple gait of a villager, free to wander hedgerows at dusk, pockets full of blackberries, head full of weather. Yet poverty held its own shackles. Rent collectors arrived with cudgels. Winter thinned bodies to husks. A single broken leg could doom a family to begging, but within that fragile span, there remained space to breathe, to weep, to laugh without permission. Isolation was a luxury the poor could not afford. Community patched roofs, loaned seed, shared rumor and rhyme. Disease might steal half the hamlet, yet those who remained buried the dead with tears unsullied by politics. Inside the castle, grief knelt alone. A baroness might lose a child and never hear another mother's comfort, for displays of sorrow risked scandal. Funerals glittered with candlelight, yet hearts shuddered behind embroidery. Protocol replaced embrace. Even wailing followed choreography. Thus the ledger balances on a cruel hinge. Comfort buys control, but control devours comfort. Privilege purchases knowledge, but knowledge foretells doom. Ritual promises safety, but becomes the net that drags its keeper beneath dark water. A plowman dies of chill before 40 summers, but each breath until then belongs wholly to him. A lord might live twice as long, yet measure years by the tightening of his own collar. Wealth builds rooms lined with mirrors. Stand within them long enough, and the reflections multiply until you no longer recall which face is yours. Poverty allows only puddles for reflection. The image ripples, disappears, demands no allegiance. So the final reckoning whispers one truth through rafters and hedgerows alike. You can cradle silk in every drawer, lock gold in every coffer, line shelves with every parchment writ since Rome, yet wake one dawn to find your name an echo, your flesh a sack of other people's expectations. You can have everything, yet stand hollow as a blown egg, shell uncracked but empty. It is possible, to possess the valley, the river, the hall, the title, and still lose the single kingdom no coin can buy. It is possible to wear crowns hammered from starlight and never feel the sun on your skin. It is possible, so terribly possible, to have all and not have yourself. The ledger names him Heinrich von Bock, sole shoot of a baronial line rooted in rock above the river Pale. The ledger writes heir in flourished ink, yet ink lies. From the hour of his first fit, limbs jerking like a puppet under devil hands, the household whispered stigma. Blood must remain unblemished, prestige must stay polished. So they pressed iron into the boy's fate and hid him behind a cedar door thick as gilt. His chamber hung in the northern turret. The one frost never left. Stone bled moisture through every seam. A single arrow slit admitted a blade of daylight, thin as a monk's smile. Chains looped from a wall staple to a cuff wrought small enough for a child wrist, though the smith left room to grow. Confinement planned for seasons beyond counting. A straw pallet lay on flagstones already white with saltpeter. Beside it stood a kneeler, varnish, worn to raw wood by genuflections forced rather than voluntary. A slate board leaned against the wall. No chalk was provided. Heinrich scavenged, scratching lines with nail, pebble, fingertip dipped in tongue. When winter cracked his knuckles open, he traced saints and dragons in bright beads of blood, art that glimmered red, then turned brown, still sharper than any fresco in the hall below. They told him he was chosen for penance, that his spasms signaled God's claim. They fed him barley broth, cooled to tepid, fearing steam might fog the arrow slit and summon mildew. A maid counted spoonfuls aloud, breath smelling of fear stronger than cloves. Each night the chaplain arrived, robe sweeping dust, lit a taper that hissed in damp air, and demanded the child recite confession. Heinrich whispered sins he did not understand. The chaplain muttered rites, doused the flame, departed. Darkness closed like a fist. Year after year the same. Bells in distant courtyards told seasons he never walked. Festivals echoed upward. Laughter, trumpets, dogs barking at fireworks. Yet the turret kept its hush. He learned hours by counting heartbeats between sentry calls. He fashioned rosaries from straw knots. He invented hymns, singing into stone until the echoes formed a choir that answered him in his own cracked voice. Then came the night the jailer forgot to shoot the bolt. Perhaps wine muddled duty, perhaps compassion dared a glance. A gust rattled the cedar door ajar. Heinrich waited, pulse hawk swift, until footsteps faded. Chains still shackled his wrist, yet slack allowed 3 strides. He tried the latch, felt it yield, stepped into corridor blue with moon. Air smelled of roast and juniper smoke, scents long exiled from his cell. He followed them. No one saw the wraith-thin boy slip through galleries where tapestries glowed like trapped dusk. Down spirals he crept, barefoot on chilled iron. At the stable arch, he paused, swallowing a sky wide beyond dreams. Stars flared. Frost bit, but cold tasted like freedom. He ran. For 7 days he wandered the outer world. Records say 7. Perhaps fewer, perhaps more, for clocks mean little to freshly hatched wonder. A shepherd found him first, crouched by a brook, cupping water with both hands, spilling half in astonished laughter. The man offered cheese. Heinrich devoured rind and all. He spoke little. Words rusted from disuse, but his eyes blazed story enough. They climbed a hill where wind combed wild heather. He lifted arms, letting sleeves flap like broken wings, shouting sound rather than speech. The shepherd joined his shout, not knowing why, only glad to hear joy echo across grazing land. Next he reached a fair on St. Bridget's Eve. Merchants hawked ribbons, cider steamed, fiddles weaved reels. Heinrich whirled between stalls, dizzy with color and motion. When fit tremor seized him, a wise woman touched his brow, saw no demon, only fragile body sparking against its own wires. She brewed valerian in goat milk. He drank, trembling eased. She asked no lineage, took no coin. He fell asleep beneath her cart, curled like a fox cub. Morning brought riders in baronial livery, hooves drumming doom. They scoured tents, wagons, hedgerows. The crowd parted. The wise woman tried to shield him. Gauntlets shoved her aside. Chains clanged anew. He did not plead. He stared at sky until clouds blurred in unshed tears. Back behind walls, punishment required spectacle. They led him, not dragged, led, for heirs must show dignity, through the courtyard where servants bowed faces to mud. The baron watched from a balcony, fingers white on balustrade. The chaplain intoned scripture about obedience flowering from suffering. Masons unbarred a postern in the cellars, a niche narrow as a coffin. They placed Heinrich inside, locked a grated door, mortared stone until the gap disappeared. One brick left loose for breath and confession, though no priest returned. A monk named Theodoric kept annals of the household. He penned a single line that survives on cracked vellum. He laughed beneath the sun, and afterward they put him where sunlight dies. Nothing more. Ink fades. The castle toppled centuries later. Excavators found the niche, bones curled like parchment shavings, a chain fused to wrist iron by rust. On the wall, etched with some shard, lingered a final drawing. A wheel upon a hill, spokes sprouting wings, rolling into a yawning horizon. Beneath it, one word scratched over and over until the stone bruised. Open. Power meant guardianship, they claimed. Yet guardianship twisted into dread of imperfection. Dread into secrecy. Secrecy into cruelty so quiet it never reached the great chronicles. Heinrich's life measured the distance between authority and mercy, and found it vast. His lineage remained unstained, his inheritance preserved, his bloodline untarnished, and the cost was the child himself. Stand in that broken turret now. Wind whistles where roof tiles lost hold. Touch the wall and feel grooves of fingernails worn to nothing. Cold still clings. Imagine a boy drawing flight in a room built to ground him. Hear laughter that rose like lark song and was buried before echo could answer. Wealth wrote his sentence. Retaliation disguised as protection. Walls are louder than chains. They repeat the verdict long after voices fall silent. Heinrich von Boch holds no estate in current maps, yet his absence weighs more than any castle that survived. His tale curves every previous account into a sharper blade. Privilege here is not reward. It is cage, muzzle, blindfold. It crowns the child, then tightens the circlet until blood beads along the brow. Remember him when titles glitter. A name wrought in gold can still be hammered into manacles. Dawn rises on two worlds sharing one sky. In the manor, the cockerel cries, muffled behind shuttered glass. In the cottage, the same cry bursts through rafters stitched with reed, shaking dust onto hearth embers. Both rooms hold breath, yet the air tastes different. In oak-paneled chambers, it hangs heavy with damp perfume, musk of fur, incense from last night's vigil. In wattle walls, it moves sharp and clean, washed by wind that slipped through chinks, smelling of nettles and livestock. The noble wakes first to silence, for servants have already banked the fire, brushed soot from the grate, set velvet slippers facing east. They hover beyond the canopy, waiting to lace sleeves, to pour rosewater over silver ewers flecked green where wine once etched the rim. The peasant wakes to clamor, hens flapping, a pig rooting beneath the bench, a child coughing beside straw pillows. He pulls hose still warm from sleep, ties a cord, strides into yard without washing more than eyelids in a wooden bucket that glitters with sky. Breakfast differs, but only by disguise. On the noble table lies red venison draped in congealed fat, darkening at the edges where flies already gather. A knife lifts a slice. Beneath the crust, the meat blurs to gray, sour with the promise of gout. Plates shine and yet poison, silver tarnished to black oxide that flakes with every scrape. The first bite tastes of clove and copper. Across the fields, the peasant chews coarse bread, barley baked with chaff that rasps the gums yet fills the belly. He eats while walking, crumb falling to soil where sparrows claim it before mold can. Hygiene clings like a joke told out of earshot. The Baroness bathes once in 7 days, lowered into a tin tub lined with linens that soak perfumes costing a page's yearly rent. Water cools fast in stone rooms. She shivers while maids scrub with cloth steeped in ammonia drawn from horse urine. They powder her afterward with lead white until every pore closes like a shutter. Beneath the mask, her skin pines for air, erupts in boils that bleed through lace by evening. The shepherd's wife bathes in the river when weather allows, laughing as minnows dart past ankles. Soot stays between fingers, sweat salts the collarbone, yet sun burns germs to chalk. Wind brushes the rest away. Lice pay no heed to heraldry. They nest in feather mattresses fluffed each morning in the solar, laying eggs in seams of silk, parading across brocade unseen until night, when torches dim and noble scalps grow warm. Servants comb them out at dawn, crack them with thumbnails, drop the corpses into ivory bowls scented with lavender, scent disguising but never cleansing. The plowman's mattress is straw renewed every quarter. Lice migrate but find scant purchase, thrown into the midden with old thatch and onion skins to feed hens. Itchy welts mark both bodies, yet one pair of hands can solve the nuisance while the other must summon apothecaries. Illness follows the same crooked path. In the castle, gout blooms, kidney stones grind, teeth blacken beneath quince conserve. Surgeons arrive with saws polished like mirrors, seeking demons in marrow, letting blood until lips blanch. Humors leave, infection enters. The ledger records the Baron breathless before 40 summers, his widow swollen with dropsy soon after. In the hamlet, egg stalks marsh nights, pox dots cheeks, winter chills bones to brass. Yet the smith's mother works the loom past 50 harvests, her back bent but unbroken, lungs filled with smoke not despair. Death itself wears 2 masks. For the elite, it approaches in velvet slippers, stifled rooms, a priest whispering indulgence while candles cough resin. Bodies lie in crypts of carved alabaster, skin already waxen from lead cosmetics, viscera rotting beneath embroidery. Coffins line chapels where incense smothers the stench, yet not even saints can breathe inside. For the poor, it comes on wind that howls through shutters, takes a child at midnight, an old man at dawn, leaves them on boards beside the hearth until the ground thaws. Neighbors dig graves near hedgerows, clay on palms, laughter on lips, remembering the dead as companions not accounts. Grief mixes with soil and returns as barley green. Labor cuts different scars. The serf hauls manure, hefts scythes, shoulders stones to patch the Lord's road. Splinters fester, joints creak, spine bows like ash in dry gusts. Pain sings through limbs every dusk, but the song feels honest, a toll paid in daylight for rest earned at night. The noble trains at tilting yard under silk banners, muscles toned, yet seldom tested beyond sport. Real combat happens on parchment, charters, debts, dowries. Quills slit deeper than lances, ink bleeds slower, yet never clots. Anxiety gnaws the marrow kings never see. Midday, aromas cross the valley. In halls, venison stews with dates shipped farther than any servant will travel. Steam rises, clouds chandeliers, drips tar upon guests seated by rank. A falconer's boy wipes condensation from silver goblets, glimpses his face warped by tarnish, wonders if the metal ever showed truth. Near the river, onions hiss in tallow on an iron plate, hammered thin. The peasant dips crust, tastes earth and fat, feels strength coil back into sinew. He may crave more, but hunger sharpens gratitude like a whetstone. Afternoon brings obligations. The Lord must attend audience, sign pardons, judge trespass he never witnessed. One petition tells of a child caught stealing apples. He orders a hand branded, then spends an hour praying for mercy upon his own soul. Guilt nests inside brocade harder to shake than fleas. The reeve collects rents from cottages. Some pay in eggs, others in labor. Coins travel upward. Worry stays behind. Children chase goats. Laughter rises, fades only when sunset drapes crimson over thatched roofs. Evening, two hearths again. In the castle, musicians pluck lutes, yet every chord skitters under talk of alliances, crusades, brewing wars. Goblets clink like distant anvils. The Baroness's smile cracks paint, reveals a tooth loosening at the root. She cannot spit, lest etiquette snap. Blood pools beneath her tongue, tasting of copper pans. In the cottage, the peasant family sits close, mending nets, telling riddles, nursing a jug of ale watered thin. Smoke curls through a hole in the thatch and stars wink above. Ash falls on a child's hair. He shakes it away and keeps singing. At last night swallows sight. The noble's bed towers like an altar, but sleep trembles, weighed by ledgers, oaths, rumors of poison. Rats scurry behind panels. Each scrape could be a dagger unsheathed. The peasant stretches on straw, ribs snug against a wife's hip, dogs at their feet. Heat of shared breath, forging a lullaby. Dreams come swift and unguarded, so the balance tilts. Where the body aches, the spirit roams. Where bone rests on down, the mind knots into shackles. The plowman drags plow and pays tithe of blood to stones, yet each sunrise returns him to fields that forgive. The baron strides galleries paved in marble, yet every reflection repeats his expiration. Physical pain roots the poor to earth, reminding them they still belong to something vast and living. Existential pain lifts the wealthy out of season and soil, suspends them in chambers where nothing grows except dread. By candle's end, one truth murmurs through both rafters and rib cages. Hunger can carve a man, yet leave him whole. Luxury can wrap a man, yet leave him hollow. Flesh may bruise from toil, but identity endures. Rank may cushion flesh, but identity drifts like smoke from a perfume brazier. Thus, the plowman groans at dawn and stands. The noble sighs at midnight and drowns in quilts stitched of his own unease. Physical pain for the worker, pain of being for the Lord. Two burdens, unequal, yet each reveals that comfort and torment are seldom where we expect. Wind drifts through a broken arrow slit, curls around stone, and sighs into nothing. The tales have quieted, lords who bled into silver basins, ladies who suffocated beneath ermine, heirs who laughed once beneath the sun and vanished into walls, all dust now. Yet their choices linger like perfume trapped in fabric, haunting the rooms we build inside our heads whenever the word luxury glitters. We picture banquet halls and see only chandeliers, never the mildew behind the tapestry. We imagine velvet and taste only grape and honey, never the copper tang of bleeding gums. We place ourselves upon thrones of carved oak and forget the iron needles of rumor pricking the spine. The stories ended centuries ago, but their echoes murmur every time a travel brochure paints a castle in dawn light, or a fantasy saga crowns a hero in silk. Memory edits the rot, splices away the fleas, dubs silence over the coughing in corridors where torches once gnawed air thin. Castles were traps disguised as triumph. Walls kept invaders out and locked miasma in. Moats mirrored sky and hid corpses of servants who slipped on frost. Tapestries blazed crimson and stifled breath behind woven saints. Every layer of defense birthed a fresh species of dread. Stone rose higher, corridors grew narrower, voices fell softer, until the safest rooms became tombs that waited only for candles to gutter. Remember that when you paint yourself into a medieval banquet. Hear the harps, yes, but hear the rats scrabbling inside the dais too. Smell rosemary smoke, but let the lead dust on the lady's cheeks sting your nose. Taste the sweet wine, yet feel the tooth loosen as syrup seeps into bone. Privilege promised forever, yet pain always arrived first and stayed longer. They longed to outwit decay. Clerics bottled relic dust. Alchemists pressed mummy flesh into pills. Physicians carved humors like butchers trimming hide. None of it mattered. A century turns every vault key to rust. An empire of coins cannot bribe a single worm. In the end, they did not live long enough even to watch their legends harden into lies. So stand in the cold hush where their echoes fade. Do not pity or condemn. Simply feel the frost on the lintel and know this: a life measured by distance from hunger can still starve the soul. A crown may guard a skull, but it cannot cradle a heartbeat. You can have all and never hold yourself. If a shiver crawls beneath your skin, if you sense strange compassion for those once called blessed, subscribe. Here, we tell the stories the world chose to forget. Stories that pry the guilt from history and show the stone beneath. If this journey cracked your picture of the Middle Ages, drop a comment that reads, "Wealth cannot save,